Canada was a rich country only 6 years ago. People from across the world flocked to it in order to begin new lives. Then, the dashing liberal darling of a prime minister happened, whose name is Justin Trudeau. The man has single-handedly obliterated the once flourishing economy of Canada, and things are only about to get worse here on. Hi and welcome to TFI Global, the foreign affairs and geopolitical analysis arm of the TFI Media Group. I am your host Sanbir Singh, and in this video we will talk about the disaster that Justin Trudeau has proven to be for Canada. Justin Pierre James Trudeau, the unusually handsome Prime Minister of Canada, cannot stop interfering with the internal affairs of other nations on dubious concerns about human rights, but he is facing quite an economic mess back home. As a matter of record, Canada's economy is at its worst since 1961. Canada's GDP contracted by 5.4% in 2020, which is quite a catastrophe even in the background of the pandemic-induced downturn. There is only one man whom you can blame for Canada's poor economy, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Make no mistake, he inherited a rich Canada with a prosperous economy from his predecessor, Stephen Harper. But in a matter of just 6 years, Trudeau has done some unprecedented damage to the Canadian economy. Even before the pandemic, Trudeau's economic policies were damaging the Canadian economy, and things have only worsened after the Wuhan virus outbreak. Justin Trudeau's predecessor, Stephen Harper, was actually an able administrator, at least in terms of economic growth. During his tenure, the Canadian per capita GDP growth matched that of the United States of America, but things changed after the present Prime Minister came to power. To be fair, Justin never promised prudent economics. Blessed with photogenic looks, his political brand was all about attracting first-time voters and liberal elites. His promises mostly revolved around populist ideas like climate vigilantism and legalizing marijuana. The results began to show shortly after Justin Trudeau assumed office in 2015. Canadian GDP growth declined sharply, and the GDP per capita growth went down to 2.7% in Canada as compared to 6.3% in the US. Even during the pandemic, Canada's economy shrank almost twice as much as the US economy did, even though the United States of America recorded more COVID-19 cases per capita. Trudeau loved mocking Trump, but now we do know that the latter's economic policies were much better. Trump was market-friendly and also sensitive about the American middle class, which showed in the form of lower tax rates. Compare this with Trudeau's disastrous taxation and regulatory policies. It was the Trudeau government that burdened the Canadians with moves like the imposition of the carbon tax, making payroll tax more expensive, increasing the top marginal income tax rate by 4 percentage points, doing away with the income splitting tax credit, and imposing higher taxes on small businesses. As if all the tax hikes were not enough, the Liberals led by Trudeau also imposed deferred taxes to the tune of almost $75 billion on Canadians. The rise in deferred taxes is plainly a legacy of the Trudeau government's imprudent fiscal policies, which will make the future tax bills even more painful. Trudeau's regulatory policy was still worse. His environmental vigilantism led to burgeoning environmental regulations and impeded natural resource development. The Trudeau government introduced anti-resource development legislations like C-69 or the No Pipelines Bill, and also rejected the amendments suggested by industries and provinces reliant on oil and gas. And then, Trudeau's liberal ideas like opening up Canada for immigration hasn't helped either. Low economic growth and higher taxes have got coupled with the diversion of resources away from Canadian citizens. After 2019, things have deteriorated further, especially because Canada has also lost political stability. Trudeau is heading a minority government today, which stands further pressurized by nefarious elements like the anti-India Khalistan lobby. Once the pandemic struck, Trudeau could have done little to make the Canadian economy worse. But such has been his saga that the Canadian Prime Minister still found more ways to damage Canada's economy. Canada's economy faced a massive contraction followed by a lukewarm recovery. The V-shaped economic recovery, that is, a sharp decline in growth followed by a phase of strong growth, is nowhere in sight. So, what led to the sharpest annual decline in the Canadian economy since the Second World War? Justin Trudeau was more committed to borrowing than any other leader around the world, but liquidity infusion cushions economic blows only when it is prudent. The Canadian Prime Minister, on the other hand, resorted to reckless borrowing. According to federal data, Canadians received 20 Canadian dollars in the form of government transfers for every dollar of income lost. Yet, Canadians hoarded most of the money that was put in their hands and it never reached the Canadian markets. So, the government ended up spending way too much, but the governmental overspending has been of little help to Canadian businesses. As one opposition leader puts it, the government spent the most to achieve the least. The sharp contraction in the Canadian economy was a consequence of the lack of economic activity and the strict lockdowns imposed by the Trudeau regime. But the negative effects of government overspending have still not showed up. The Canadian economy is bound to get worse from here. According to economist William Robson, Chief Executive Officer of the C.D. Ho Institute in Toronto, the federal government's capacity to deliver future services has deteriorated further spectacularly. He also said that tax hikes are a near certainty. Ever since Trudeau came to power, the Canadian economy has uniformly moved towards slower growth and major contractions. The Canadian Prime Minister inherited a rich Canada, but he has taken only 6 years to take it towards total misery.